universe that is Gears of War is always comically going through some sort of world-ending conflict. That's kind of the whole point that makes it so fun. Big stakes, big risks, and even bigger humans and monsters. I mean, the planet is actually called Sera, which is Ares backwards, the god of war. No, not that god of war, this god of war, though that one's pretty damn good. Now I could ramble on about the history and lore of Gears of War for hours upon hours, but today I only want to talk about key moments during the Locust War that created major shifts in the story for better or for worse. But it's usually for much worse. Emergence Day was the very beginning of the Locust War, quite literally the very first day. This was when the Locust Horde broke free from the ground and began invading the surface and absolutely obliterating humanity. And when I say obliterate, man, it was a very bad day. Just before the invasion, humanity had only found itself with 6 weeks of peace, with the Pendulum Wars ending after 79 years. Think of that, only 6 weeks of peace before E-Day threw the globe into another devastating global conflict. But this time it was far worse than the world had ever seen or ever would. All over the planet, the Locusts used corpses and other creatures to open up holes in the ground to which their army could pour out of. Out of these emergence holes came drones, boomers, berserkers, brumoks, cedars, wretches, and everything the Locusts had in their arsenal. From what we can tell, the first location of engagement with the surface was the city of Janamont, being led by the newly appointed leader of the Locust army, Rom. Alongside him was his greatest friend Scourge and his personal blight called the Bloodied Vanguard. They first emerged inside the Janamont Cog military base, throwing it into disarray as suddenly the base was filled with thousands of drones attacking from all sides. The base would very quickly fall to the new threat, and Rom and his Bloodied Vanguard would take the city. And while Janamont was falling, major cities across the world were also falling under attack. Even on the other side of the planet, General Karn was engaging with the entire UIR government, using his incredible mind and battle tactics to pick apart their defenses. As the global invasion ensued, human infrastructure began to collapse. The global communications network crashed with all the sudden calls, with the same happening to police lines and emergency lines. Trains, buses, and aircraft all grinded to an immediate halt. Civilians rushed to anywhere they could find safety, and hospitals began overflowing with casualties. The military was spread thin, trying to hold back the Locust while evacuating civilians across their cities across the entire world. By the end of Emergence Day, 26 hours later, the human population was estimated to have lost a total of 25% in the attacks. Billions of human lives were crushed and millions missing or captured, all within 26 hours. The day was the absolute turning point for humanity and the planet, so much so that humanity would change the way it dictates its time. Now all events would be dated by how long before or after Emergence Day something occurred. BE for before Emergence Day and AE for after Emergence Day. Hopefully the new upcoming Gears of War game titled E-Day will be able to portray just how chaotic and terrifying the day truly was. And for those curious, we do know where some of our favorite characters were on this fateful day. Marcus Phoenix and Dominic Santiago are together in the Kalana district. Augustus Cole was in the city of Hanover. Anya Stroud, Colonel Hoffman, and Min Young Kim were in the capital city of Ephyra. Most likely, Baird was also in Ephyra, though this is unconfirmed. Jay Stratton was in Alima City, Bernie Mataki was at her home island of Galangi, and Dizzy Wallen was just outside Porta Agari. As the war progressed, humanity found no luck in planting its feet and fighting back successfully against the Locust Horde. Not even an entire year of fighting later, humanity was a mere 1 or 2 months away from total collapse and defeat. They had no counter to the Locust, no good way to stop them from tunneling beneath most of the planet, and no way to counterattack them. All they could do was deal with them when they rose from the ground, but at that point they were on the defensive and always in a worse position. The UIR had collapsed roughly 6 weeks into the war, so the COG was humanity's final hope and survival. They continued to try to hold everything together across all of their nations, especially their mainland of Pyrrhus, even if it meant spreading their forces everywhere. Another key issue that was plaguing them was that with every city the Locusts would take control of was another city full of resources that they could add to their war efforts and grow even more powerful. With their situation only growing more and more dire, Chairman Prescott, the new leader of the COG, decided on a truly desperate action: the Hammer of Dawn strikes. The key point to the strikes were this: stop the Locust advancement and centralize humanity in one region, that being called the Jacinto Plateau. But how they would go about this is where the horrors begin. In their planet's orbit, the COG had satellites that carried the Hammer of Dawn, a laser that could rain down massive destruction across the planet. This was great against the Locusts, but with them living below ground, it was only useful when they were above ground. With this weapon on hand, Prescott decided to sacrifice the world around the Jacinto Plateau by using the Hammer of Dawn to burn everything to the ground. He would target all cities, infrastructure, and just about anything the Locust would ever see as useful. And in an effort to not tip off the Locust and give them time to retreat back underground, Prescott only issued a 3-day warning to the public announcing his plans. The people of the world had 3 days to make their way to the Jacinto Plateau, or find somewhere safe to hide to avoid the Hammer of Dawn strikes. When the day finally came, Prescott himself took on the burden of firing the weapon. Even after all the discussions from Adam Phoenix, Colonel Hoffman, General Salaman, and his entire cabinet all arguing for or against the strikes, Prescott proceeded with his plan. Pressing the buttons, all of the Hammer of Dawn satellites across the entire planet began firing on the surface, setting the world ablaze, destroying everything, including all Locust forces on the surface. Dust, ashes, and debris began clouding the skies as the hammers fired continuously for hours. After the strikes were completed, COG forces were deployed on key cities to wipe up any surviving Locust. By the end, roughly 90% of Sera was destroyed, their cities, rivers, forests, buildings, and so on. Prescott and the COG sacrificed 90% of the planet, their homes and their people, all so that a small fraction of survivors could get the chance to live. 9 years after the Hammer of Dawn strikes in 10 AE, humanity was still fighting. Better than before now that the Locusts could not so easily tunnel below them, but still not great and definitely not winning. Despite the overwhelming losses they took during the Hammer of Dawn strikes, the Locusts were still a dominating force with a large army to their name. And in 10 AE, they focused their sights on taking the capital of the COG, Ephyra. If they could take the city, it would be a big blow to the COG both logistically and to their morale. But because of the granite rock underneath the city, the Locusts were traveling above ground, advancing towards the city. This gave the COG ample time to set up their defenses and evacuate civilians to other cities, mainly Jacinto. Included in the defenses was Marcus Phoenix, Dominic Santiago, Ty Caliso, Jay Stratton, Anya Stroud, and Colonel Hoffman, all of which who will be important later on. Now I'm going to give you a surprise because it also surprised the COG defense in Ephyra. You remember how I said the Locusts could not easily tunnel underneath the Jacinto Plateau, sometimes being impossible? Well, Ephyra was usually on the impossible side. However, if the Locusts could find a fissure in the ground, this would allow some room for tunneling, which is exactly what happened in this case. Just south outside of Ephyra, the Locusts found a fissure that led into the abandoned metro tunnels. Suddenly, instead of being miles away and knowing where their enemies were, the COG defense was being ambushed by thousands of Locusts flooding out of these tunnels. It was estimated that more than 10,000 soldiers began swarming the city, including Locust beasts like Brumox and Reavers. Being overwhelmed, the COG retreated back to Chancery Bridge that connected to Ephyra in hopes to halt the Locust advance and prevent them from entering the city at all. Their new plan was to use the Hammer of Dawn to blow the bridge, but this is where Marcus and his squad come into play. During this battle, Marcus Phoenix had found the Hammer of Dawn team wiped out and instinctively took the targeting laser device. He saw that the targeting optic had broken off and placed it in his pocket for safekeeping. After rendezvousing with Hoffman and Anya, he accepted the order from Hoffman to take the hammer to the Chancery Bridge to destroy it. However, before Marcus returned to his squad, Anya received a call from Marcus's father, Adam Phoenix. He was calling to say goodbye to Marcus, as the Phoenix estate inside the East Barricade Academy was getting overrun and he would soon be gone. Hearing this, Marcus decided to go after his father to try to save him, but Hoffman reissued his command that Marcus must take the hammer to the bridge so that they could win the battle and keep the city. But Marcus did not care. He punched Hoffman in the face and knocked him to the ground. Even with Anya, the love of his life, trying to talk sense into Marcus, Marcus placed the targeting device on the ground and returned to his King Raven with his squad inside. He lied to them and told them that their orders had changed and they were being sent to recover his father. Critically, Marcus forgot one thing. The targeting optic for the device was still in his pocket. Without it, aiming the Hammer of Dawn accurately was extremely difficult. Thus, when Hoffman and Anya returned to the bridge, they were unable to destroy it in time and the Locust overran the position, flooding into South Ephyra. With it, COG forces retreated to the best of their ability, but countless men were lost via this defeat. And to twist the blade even more, Marcus Dom and their squad was unable to save Adam Phoenix, who was buried underneath a mountain of rubble after their King Raven pilot crashed into the side of the building. He was presumed dead, but was secretly taken by Prescott to the hidden bunker island of Azura. In the end, the fall of Ephyra resulted in the COG losing a majority of the city, which in turn resulted in the loss of the entire city. Adam Phoenix was lost, and Marcus Phoenix, the war hero of humanity, was sentenced to 40 years in the Jacinto Maximum Security Prison, aka the Slab. After the fall of Ephyra, the COG would fall back to the city of Jacinto, which they would hold for the next 4 years. They would end up voluntarily sinking their own city in order to flood the Hollows and annihilate a large chunk of the Locust population. However, that came with one terrible downside that they would come to regret later in the future: the beginning of the Lambent Pandemic in 14 AE. Previously, the parasitic infection Lambency was relegated to where emulsion rivers, lakes, and mining rigs were located. Locusts became infected because their homeland was surrounded by emulsion, and human miners, miners with an E, eventually became infected because they worked closely with emulsion for countless years. After the sinking of Jacinto, these prior stagnant emulsion lakes and rivers now were in the same current and flow as the oceans and rivers on the surface, and thus the parasite could now access most of the entire world. Despite what we see in the games, Lambency goes far deeper than simply taking control of a species and adding them to the Lambent army. No, what adds an additional touch of horror is the fact that Lambency can degrade the land that it touches, let alone all the species in the area as well. After humanity left Jacinto, the remnants of the cog were treated to an island called Vectes, which exemplifies the horrors of the parasitic organism. For a time, locals stranded were the only issues that they were facing, until the Lambent army began slowly appearing and taking over the island. Their strongest ships in the water could be punctured by their stalks, flooding them and sinking them to the bottom of the ocean. These stalks could emerge nearly anywhere, burrowing their way through the ground similar to the locust, but they could find those rare fissures in the ground much easier. After they emerge, they spew out soldiers and polyps, bringing terror to the island. Even if you can defeat their overwhelming forces, those same stalks would spread the infection across the land, making them useless to grow crops, and infect any animals that would traverse the environment. Not to mention the animals inside the ocean were beginning to turn as well, so fishing boats were suddenly in danger of bringing an explosive creature on board. Every day was a fresh day of evolution for the Lambent parasite, bringing in new species, new weapons, and new terrors for humanity and Locust alike. For example, a Locust drone would initially turn into a Lambent drone, but with enough time, it could evolve further into a more deadly version called a Drudge. Humans would eventually become Formers, Berserkers into Lambent Zerkers, Boomers to Gunkers, and so on and so forth. And everything that I've mentioned was not exclusive to Vectes, but instead, the entire world all at the same time was dealing with these issues. Stranded and UIR survivors had to deal with the same issues with less resources than the cog had available to them. And with the Lambent constantly attacking Vectes and the remnants of the cog, they were forced to leave the island in 15 AE, splitting into 3 separate groups. One group led by Quentin Michelson would stay on the ship called the Sovereign and travel the ocean in hopes to help more people on the mainland while also staying on the move away from the Lambent. Another group led by Victor Hoffman would fall back to Anvil Gate as a permanent home, living off the land and hoping its fortress walls could protect them in the long run. Finally, the Gorazny population that the cog allied with on Vectes decided to go their own way, being led by Miran Trescu. And just like that, after 15 years of non-stop fighting, the cog was finally disbanded, and the world was thrown into unknown chaos for the next 2 years. In 17 AE, or 2 years after the disbandment of the cog, the forces of humanity came together one final time in order to help Adam Phoenix save the world during the Second Battle of Azura. After his supposed death during the Fall of Ephyra 7 years before, Adam had spent his time on the secret island of Azura building a device called the Emulsion Countermeasure. The intentions of it were to vaporize all emulsion cells on the planet using radiation pulses emitted from the machine. In essence, emulsion, and therefore the Lambent, would be annihilated from the entire globe completely. The Locust would also be destroyed too, since most of their bodies were mostly infected. This would also include any humans or animals that were mostly infected or completely infected. With a push of a single button, the entire world could be saved from the threats that have terrorized humanity for 17 years. The issue was, just before Adam Phoenix could complete this world-saving project, the Locust discovered and captured the island. This was the first Battle of Azura. After doing so, Queen Mira kept Adam alive so that he could alter the machine to only affect the Lambent and not kill the Locust horde. Ultimately, this led to Marcus Phoenix to bring together all of the assets and humans that he could to travel and retake the island to save his father and in turn, the world. Marcus and friends received all this news from Prescott, who escaped Azura during the Locust takeover. Marcus began taking immediate action, leaving for Anvil Gate to discover where to find Azura and sending Baird and Cole to find Trescu and the Gorazny so that they could have reinforcements during the battle. Upon breaking through Azura's maelstrom barrier by going under it in a submarine, Marcus and Delta Squad would destroy the device in order to allow their Gorazny reinforcements to enter the island. However, alongside them came the Lambent, who could now access the island and were doing so in droves. In an instant, hundreds of stalks began emerging from the water and the surface, sending out thousands of Lambent soldiers across the island. The battle had suddenly turned into a 3-way fight. Humanity was trying to activate the Emulsion Countermeasure in order to be the last species standing. The Locusts were trying to fight off the other forces so that they had time to alter the device before firing it to kill off the Lambent. Finally, the Lambent themselves were simply trying to take out the other two armies to reign supreme as the dominant species on the planet. The most important step for humanity was to retrieve Adam Phoenix, who was locked inside his office towards the top of the Pinnacle Tower. Fighting through both Locust and Lambent, Marcus reunited with his father, and the two, alongside Delta Squad, fought their way to the rooftop where the emulsion countermeasure was located. Queen Mira re-entered the battle riding on her Tempest Beast and began fighting Delta, also calling in her elite Palace Guard Therons to stop them. After an incredible fight, the Tempest was brought down thanks to the Hammer of Dawn, throwing Mira off and allowing Adam Phoenix to finally activate the emulsion countermeasure. As the machine fully charged up, it began sending pulses out that spread across the entire planet both above and below ground. Any and all emulsion cells began to be vaporized, degrading away and killing each individual cell. Lambent-infected organisms leaked emulsion and fell to the ground. The Locust also began falling to the ground, however many did not outright die, but instead many began getting encased in the remnants of these vaporized cells called emulsion crystals. Humans that were too far infected would also be destroyed, as we saw with Adam Phoenix himself turning into ashes. He was too far infected because he injected himself with emulsion to study its evolution. After the countermeasure was deployed, the Second Battle of Azura was won, with humanity being the ultimate victors. The Locust and Lambent wars were finally over after 17 years of fighting. In the end, the human population had gone from billions to mere hundreds of thousands. But humanity no longer had to worry about the threats that plagued their world for the last 17 years, and they could finally get the tomorrow that they had always been fighting for. Believe it or not, this was only a few key major moments from the Locust War era. There's so much more to talk about, let alone the Pendulum War era and the Swarm War era. So let me know if you're interested in another video like this and which era you would like to know more about. Thank you to my channel members, and a huge thank you to my Elite Onyx Guard, Bizarre Clay, Rocket, Dovankin, El Loco Encerrado, Alp, Kenrich Knight, Mr. Fox Minister, and It's Haha. Your support means the world to me. Alright gears, till next time.